can introduce ourselves. I'm Linda Lacoste, School Committee.
Narissa Wallen, School Committee.
Mike Colburn, Salisbury Selectman.
Terry Morangi, Salisbury Selectman.
Ronnie Parrott, Salisbury Select Board. Kelly Smallin, School Committee.
Caitlin Hunter, School Committee.
Aaron Berger, School Committee.
Leslie Matthews, Select Board, Newbury.
Richard Keys, Finance Committee, Newbury.
Sherry David, Selectman Raleigh.
Brian Perry, Triton, Director of Finance and Operations.
Brian Forget, Superintendent for Triton.
Yes, I'm the other one.
Yeah.
We met before. Brian with a Y.
Go back and forth. It was the Brian and the other Brian.
The next item is the meeting notes, and they're attached. We don't have to vote on them, so just if everybody can take a moment to look at them, see if anybody has voted on them. Seeing none, we'll continue on with general update, and
Thank you, Linda. I'll keep this brief because two of the big things that certainly are on the top of everyone's mind are agenda items tonight. But just a couple items that have been in the news that I just wanted to talk to you about. So there's lots of discussion about question 2 that removed the MCAS as a graduation requirement. It removed the MCAS as the competency determination. So there is still a large lack of clarity around exactly what that means. There's lots of different attorneys' opinions. DESE has not taken a real clear and articulated stand on what that means, other than it is going to be a locally determined competency determination. So that the key difference is that it is not. It is tied to, but it is not the same as a graduation requirement. So the school committee has a graduation requirement. It is set out in the policy. The competency determination in law is a separate measure, and it speaks to currently, it's the 10th grade MCAS, which is measuring mathematics, English, science, STEM, basically at the 10th grade level. So that will be the same, I guess, metric, we'll say, but we have to have another locally determined competency determination, or how we're making that competency determination. So the language about what it is didn't change. The language about the MCAS being the measure did change. So our hope, there's lots of discussion between districts because, again, DESE's not given us a lot of clarity around this. But our goal is to tie it to the graduation standards and bring that back to the committee this spring, so that it does take effect for the class of 25, the students graduating in 5 months now. Holy cow, January's almost over. It is a student or two that's even a factor right now, students that hadn't already passed the 10th grade MCAS. But so that I just want to make sure people were clear, because I know there's a lot of talk about that, what that means. So our hope is to keep it as simple as possible, tying it to the graduation requirements. It would, on first measure, you would think, okay, you just have to make sure that your graduation requirements are at least as strict as the competency determination, which is those 10th grade standards. However, we have to have a path for individuals who want to appeal. We have to have a path for individuals who hadn't previously. So anyone after 2001, when that law went into effect, until today, anyone who did not receive a high school diploma and a competence, or did not receive a diploma because they didn't meet their competency determination by passing the MCAS, we have to provide them a path. So 24 years worth of Triton graduates who we know, right? We have records for those students, but also students who maybe didn't live in our towns but now do. So lots of clarity around the kind of likely smaller incidences rather than the kind of the general population. But just to make sure you're clear, I don't imagine people are coming up to you and asking about that every day, but just as town officials, in case people do ask, it is something on the agenda Again, it's a small number of students, I believe it's currently one, that would be impacted for the class of 25. But even with that one student, I think it's a very easy box to check. So unless anyone has any questions about that, we'll be done talking about MCAS and competency determination. Cool.
Anybody have any questions? The next item is the
I
MS.
just have one more update, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
You're seeing on the news locally with the change in federal administration on Monday, questions about ICE raids in schools, questions about is there going to be a Department of Education, what is going to change. There are certainly already reports of raids happening within the Commonwealth. They are not happening in districts like Triton, right, where we have low incidences of minority populations. But it is something we obviously are aware of and keeping our eye out. I was at a workshop today. Attorney General Campbell was there, and there is guidance that is supposed to be imminently being provided to us. But just again to confirm, an ICE raid in a school is not lawful. ICE cannot enter a school building without a warrant. If ICE comes in with a warrant, we don't have the legal ability to stop them. We certainly would slow it down. But so just to make sure that we're clear on that again, I don't think it's an issue that we're going to deal with here locally. Little old Triton on the North Shore here. But in case it does come up, that you can be aware, or that you can let people know if they come to you that is certainly that's on our radar. It is something we're talking about, and certainly something that we're prepared to deal with if it happens.
And there are some schools that have already passed, because I've already gotten, these are our policy, this is what you do, this is how you respond, because my school is one that could potentially, so I know that there are already policies in place to protect our children, so.
So our mantra is we do nothing differently than we have done always. And obviously you keep hearing about Worcester, right? Huge immigrant population, minority population, Chelsea.
There's another one, and we have Chelsea students.
Lots of communications going out. We haven't done any communications yet, because at this point it's very much a quiet thing, but we'll see how that changes, and if it does, we'd be prepared to respond, both communicating and taking immediate action.
Yeah, quick question on that. So, my hypothesis, because Ronnie knows I care about kids. Potentially, a parent could be taken, right? How do you deal with that?
So you're saying a parent's removed
Yeah.
and the child is
They're
not?
at the school day. How do you deal with that?
So just to make sure I'm understanding your scenario, not within the school. You're not saying that at the
No, not at the school. Say they were at work, they were somewhere, the parents were taken.
child's with us, we get
How do we
notified.
protect the kid?
So I would, so there are some things that,
Do we have a policy in place for that? Because it's not only if they come into the school, but how do we protect the kid?
yeah. So if it happened in the school, obviously it's a much more public thing. If it happened outside of school, there are certainly protocols for us to make sure that we report and care for the child. There are things that, right, the what ifs that you plan for that you never want to think about. Large scale, big scale trainings, lockdowns, reunifications. One thing I have zero doubt about is that, because it happens all too routinely, is students who are going home to a parent and the parent isn't there as expected. So you're explaining a case that is obviously an extreme as to why the parent is there, but whether it be a bus driver or someone working in the front office of a school, or an educator or me, right? It's not uncommon to say, hey, we've got so-and-so, mom or dad wasn't at the bus stop. They were supposed to pick up. They weren't here. And the kids stay on the bus, they come right back to school, and the principal's got them, and we figure it out. I guarantee any school committee members, being in schools and kind of walking through, and like, oh, John's still here. It's 4:30, and it's, so it's not, I wish that wasn't so routine. So I think in that case, it's the extreme as far as the reason why. Right, our job would be to do everything we can to make sure that it's the least impact on that student.
I'm just asking because when you're thinking of the policy, I think that should be a part of the policy. What's your response to that?
Yeah.
That's the only reason I'm saying.
That's fair.
Because sometimes we forget, we're here for the kids.
Yes.
They're political, it's a very politically charged topic.
Yes.
And there's extremes on both sides, right? And as
Sure.
we, as adults, especially leaders of our communities, we have to be in the middle. We have to understand that we're here for the kids first. All the other minutiae in the world don't really care about. You gotta make sure the kids are safe first. So I just was, if you're gonna write a policy, make sure that's a part of that policy. What's your response on that?
Absolutely, and I would say one of the things that you should all feel confident as, town officials, your educators and staff in this district are absolutely all about kids. Does that mean there's not those who are not? Of course.
You know, I support you guys 100%, and we're probably a lot more than most, so. I just wanted to have that conversation. I think that should be a part of the conversation, that's all.
Fair point.
Anybody have anything else? We're going to move on to MSBA acceptance next steps.
Okay. I'm glad I left a chair between us. You're not sounding great here tonight.
The code.
It's a good. Has anyone not had it in the last 3 weeks?
You're not living in this region, have you ever been sick?
Exactly, yes. Okay, so last time we met was November. We didn't have a meeting in December, so you've obviously seen lots of communications. The cough drops. You've seen lots of communications, but this is the first time we've had the opportunity to sit around a table and talk about the fact and for a moment celebrate our being welcomed into the MSBA core pipeline. Again, to confirm, it is a multi-step process before we even are moving with designers, towards a potential plan. So just to clarify timelines, we were welcomed into, it's called Module 1. If you look up on the site, it's the eligibility period. We have 9 months to complete a set of tasks, and that period starts on February 3rd. There were 22 districts that were welcomed into the MSBA this year. That is a very high number compared to years past. So they have quite a large number of districts that they're managing. So they phased all of those eligibility periods. I know, for example, Ipswich was welcomed in again. Their eligibility period doesn't start until July 1st, end of June. In our process in working with the MSBA, we've had lots of conversations about the fact that this has been an ongoing discussions with our member communities since 2019. We've worked towards putting money aside in a stabilization to pay for the feasibility and schematic design. And our request was, please, we want to move as quickly as we possibly can, and they heard that. So we're in the first kind of stanch of districts. So our period starts on February 3rd, ends on October 31st. We have the ability to expedite that somewhat. Once we complete that, we then move into where Module 2 and 3, we're picking a designer, we're starting that study into 4 with a schematic design. That next 3 modules is roughly a 2-year process. By the end of Module 4, we're looking at a schematic design that we're bringing to towns to say, this is what the school building committee and then the school committee has approved to put forward as a schematic design for approval by the 3 towns. That's when our 3-member towns, it would be an override. Obviously, we don't have to guess. Override has to pass in all 3 communities at town meeting, and then it has to pass in all 3 communities as a debt exclusion override. So as far as the timing, so from there then, it would be once that passed, we probably move into another 2 to 3 year period, depending on the phase or the how fast construction is of continued, like actual construction phase, and moving from there. So just as far as our plan, the main tasks that we have to accomplish during this first 9 months is funding, which as a box we were able to check. Thank you for your work with us over the last 5 years to make sure we had that money in stabilization to address this. The other big piece is establishing the school building committee. There's a bunch of other things, including we have to certify our enrollment with them, and that can sometimes be a fight because everything from this point forward is then driven by our enrollment. We will be saying we want to make sure it is accurately high. They tend to skew small. We've had this discussion at Pine Grove, right? It got smaller, classes tighter, and we're okay at the moment. So that's a big one, but then obviously the funding and the school building committee. So in your packet, you have a one-pager. Thanks to Narissa for her mad Canva skills. Just about what the school building committee is and our approach. So it is a school committee. Did I say school building committee? It is the school building committee is appointed by the school committee. You can see here on this paper just some details about what the committee is and what's expected. Wanted to make sure we're hoping that we keep a committee relatively intact. Obviously, there might be a middle school parent who no longer is a middle school parent, and those roles change. Students as well, but by and large, we want to keep this as intact as possible. So it ended up a committee of 18. This is a representative group. Their job is to organize and oversee this effort, and included in that is lots of involvement and feedback from the community. We had a good discussion with the committee about there's a school of thought to make a building committee really big. There's a school of thought to make the building committee even smaller than we have it. What was it? One town was like 5.
The smallest one.
So no, we want it larger than that. So down at the bottom of the blue box, you can see the roles that will be filled. Again, these are roles, not named people. So it's superintendent, district facilities manager, director of finance and operations, middle school principal, high school principal, 2 school committee members. From there, we go to staff, students, and families. There'll be 2 staff, 1 middle school staff rep, 1 high school staff rep, 2 high school students. We talked about middle school student, high school student. These meetings will likely be evenings. Probably not fair to expect a 13-year-old to be there at a 7 o'clock meeting and actually caring about that at that time of night. So Owen Silva, who's our high school committee rep, did a nice job arguing on behalf of his role. He's lived through the middle school and high school experience. He and another, or whoever the high school reps, can speak on behalf of the middle school and high school students. And then similarly, 1 parent from the middle school, 1 parent from the high school. And then there's town representation, town official representation. So we have, or town and community, I should say. Linda asked that each town select board nominate 1 member of the select board or town administrator. And I know those discussions are in process. And then one of the boxes we have to check, there are roles that we have to fill with the MSBA requirement for a building committee. And one is a community member with construction, engineering, or architecture related experience. So we're asking for 2 community members, that have that experience. So communications have gone out or are literally going out as we speak. I sent a message out yesterday to the entire school community, not just the middle school, high school, looking for folks in our community. They don't have to be parents. I've heard from both so far that have that related experience. School councils are organizing that at the middle school and high school. Student council at the high school for the student reps. I think the left column is straightforward, and then, as I said, the select board is nominating 1 member for the town official representation. So our hope is that we can check all of these boxes. Again, we have up to 9 months. The plan, and if anyone, I don't know, several of you jumped on the meeting, the MSBA meeting, you saw Manchester, Essex was welcomed into Module 2. At the same meeting, we were welcomed into Module 1. They were, last December, welcomed into Module 1. So the way that MSBA thinks about it is that you have 9 months to check all the boxes, and then they get their ducks in a row and schedule you at the next board meeting. There's a December meeting, there's an October meeting, there's an August meeting. So we said, all right, so you're assuming we're at the December meeting. What do we back that up to the October meeting? What do you think? The response is there are no guarantees, but that seems like a reasonable effort that might be possible. It was like, well, what do you think about the August meeting? And it was a definite, possible, much more challenging, but it would be aggressive, but that we can keep that on the table. And I said, what about the June meeting? And it was, Brian, stop it. So our goal is right now to complete all of this by early summer so that we can get it all to the MSBA with the hope that we would get on, it's August 28th, I believe, 26th, to get on that August agenda. If we don't, it would be October, late October, October 31st, I believe. No, October 28th. So once that's all completed, that if we get welcomed in at that meeting, whether it's August or October or December, I guess, we would then be moving towards selecting a designer. So that, when you go into Module 2, that's when it starts to get real and fun and exciting. Our goal is that the building committee would be meeting while we're putting together all of the requirements for Module 1, strictly from a kind of, scene setting, framing the work, a meeting or two, so that we can say we've convened, people are clear about their role, their responsibilities, and start to talk through those processes. So that's where we're at. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to jump in, or questions, thoughts, opinions.
I think the one thing I would add is, this has been kind of a topic of conversation. So we know, going back to the original facilities assessment in 2019, right, that the building is in rough shape. It's old. The systems are only meant to last so long. The roof is only meant to last so long. They're all sort of at the end of the life, and no amount of maintenance is going to keep them going long term, because the breaks are just worse and worse. And we've dealt with the tight tank getting essentially breached in the last year. Two of them actually that needed to be redone. We recently had an issue with the wastewater treatment plant that required essentially pumping throughout the day and excavation and to resolve that. So we know that these issues are getting kind of more expensive. I think one of the relief points with me about getting the invitation from the MSBA is that a few years ago town meetings set up the stabilization account. We were able to take some of the federal ESSER funds and put the money in there for the design process. When you're working with the MSBA, they reimburse you for a portion of that. So unlike doing a project potentially on our own, which is what we were looking at when we had been denied several times over because our project wasn't high enough priority in their list. There were so many other districts that had buildings that were in even worse shape, which is rough to believe. In that situation, we now, if something goes wrong during this process where we're doing design, we're going to have a good chunk of money that's still sitting in that stabilization from that funding that we'll be able to use for sort of these emergency measures that we need to take to do some major repairs to keep the building going. So I think, in the past where we wondered how will the building last through a construction project in good shape, we now have a reserve through this MSBA partnership that can limp it through without having to go back to the towns and saying, oh my gosh, there's a huge emergency.
That's a question.
Yeah.
So that was, that money, that stabilization was for the feasibility study. So when does that get paid out? Is that in the first, before August, or?
So that would be, that money, the committee, started 3 different sentences there. Generally, if a community doesn't have the money, there would be a vote at town meeting to appropriate an override or cash for that amount. It's then set aside. Because the stabilization is set up as a district stabilization with everyone's full knowledge, that's a vote of the school committee to appropriate it.
Yes.
So that vote has to be done and certified that we've set aside the money as part of Module 1. It's when we go and start the beginning of Module 2, where you select the designer and the construction manager and start the study, that's where you start to spend that money.
And so when would the when
go ahead.
would the reimbursement then start to occur?
So the MSBA, they use a system called ProPay.
Yeah.
Yep. Rowley knows it well. Karen Summit could speak to it from Pine Grove. So we pay the bill, they reimburse us within 30 days.
So it's as it goes.
So
It's one submission a month.
yeah,
Yep.
and so
I got you.
It's a percentage, right? So we're paying, we get X bill for whatever amount. We pay that bill, and then they have set a percentage as we've entered that module.
Okay.
And that percentage within 30 days comes back to us. So sometimes
That's
it's
impressive for
Well,
the state.
so unlike
compared
other state
to-
funding, you're actually going to see that money in a set time.
Right.
So I get your question, like, how many months are we
Well,
waiting?
because normally the state, it's like 2 years later, you might see the check,
Finish,
oops, the money went away, sorry, we don't have it.
I
So
suppose
that's
the
great,
state, you know.
that's great.
So when I started in this role, they were auditing the Salisbury and Triton building projects. So when I started in 2005, those projects were done in 99, 2000. So it was formerly the SBAB, the School Building Assistance Bureau, and it was a part of the Department of Education, all due respect. It was taken away from the Department of Education, good choice, and given to the treasurer. They kind of know a thing or two about managing money, right? And so that whole system has evolved through the treasurer. Deb Goldberg is the chair of the MSBA. So like they have board of directors. So that whole process is through the treasurer. So it is very efficient. It is a very prescribed,
Can we
right?
put everything into that process?
Right, exactly.
Well, let's not overload that process until we're done.
So there is a downside in that we have to do and study and jump through hoops that we wouldn't have to otherwise jump through. However, I would expect we're going to be in the 50% range. We get that right out of the gate for the feasibility and schematic phase, and then during that phase, when we're studying and designing that schematic design, we have the ability to get extra bonus points if you're designing, LEED certified, efficiency certified, past practice and building maintenance and things like that. So there's all these opportunities. There's a bill currently. Again, it's a bill. It's a long way. I believe that was Rep. Peisch, right, who put it in, that in the MSBA you would have incentive points for developing in-district special education programming space. And those would be added incentive points in the MSBA formula. So say we're 50 during feasibility, or maybe it's 45, we could get that. I want to say Pine Grove, we were 49 point something and ended up like 53, 54 point something. I forget the exact number. So that number generally grows from what it's originally agreed to. But even that, I should have said that reimbursement rate, that base rate that you can then incentivize from there, is set as part of this first window. So when we come out of this first module 1, we have a building committee formed and certified. We have a vote saying we have the money, here's how we'll pay for it. And we have a funding agreement that documents all of that with the MSBA that includes their reimbursement. Awesome. Yeah. It's a busy administrivia paper. I mean, some of the things I can't believe I have to write up. But yes, it's all worth it.
When you allocated each, like 2 high school, 2 parents, is there a reason why you went 2 and not 3?
Yeah.
I actually spoke to this at the meetings. I said, somebody is going to say that. And so I did bring it up and asked, so we had a discussion about it. And it was Owen, actually, who eloquently stated that once they get into Triton Middle School, they are Triton. And he felt that as a student representative, and speak again to it, but as a student representative and student council, he felt it was disingenuous to separate people out by town at that point, and to have, their peers, all 3 towns go there, all 3 towns vote for those students. So he felt that was fair and was showing kind of that one Triton mentality. But it was a discussion that we had.
I do agree with you, but I would say the majority of the people in the towns will not agree with you.
And I did bring it up, and I will say I was put at ease with Owen saying and
I agree with
eloquently.
Owen, but it's not
So
going
one
to
of
be
the
the
other
consensus
things-
in the 3 towns.
Yeah,
And I
Michael,
agree.
one of the
That's-
other things, when Brian sent out the email asking if there's community members, he said in the email itself that there's going to be consideration given when he takes a look at what towns people are from, in making sure that when he's picking those people, that
Brian's going to have to balance
that it's
that well,
spread.
because if it's
Yeah.
short-sighted one way, because, I love a lot of Newbury Raleigh people, but Salisbury's always getting kicked out in these discussions on a lot of times. And we're not going to take it. I'm telling you right now, when it comes to this building, we're not going to take it.
It was a discussion. I think
I'll just say personally, I know Caitlin's going to go back to this conversation, but I'm really disappointed to hear you say that.
No.
And just,
mean, we as a committee over the years have tried to make sure that all of us are one Triton. Even in this room, we're all one Triton and we can have a discussion any way we want.
I feel that way, but I'm just telling the
But the
majority
thing
of the
is-
towns
is-
don't know that.
As we go through this process, there's going to be so much community input. So we'll make sure of that too. It's just not going to be the school building committee's decisions. It's going to, you're going to have, whatever topic we're talking, you're going to bring in experts on that subject and have people discuss, give their
As long as
input.
it's balanced, I'm okay
Yeah.
with it, but I'm gonna get pushback.
And I think that falls on us, though. Like, I'll take full accountability. I think it falls on the school committee, and it falls on us. And that's,
Well, you have 3 members
Yeah.
of Salisbury here, you have 3 members of Rowley, and you have 3 members of Newbury here,
you
so.
know, leadership comes from the top, so I think it
We're-
falls
right.
on us, and we need to show that we are putting all 3 towns first and equal, and making sure that as Triton gets built, that we are ensuring every single student that's going to enter there is accepted, has a space there, and is thought about to the best of our ability. So I did bring it up, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it even after the conversation, but I did kind of reach out, I did speak to other members and kind of get a sense of it as well. But I think it all came back to, well, you're on that board, so now, like, accountability falls on the 9 of us and the school district, and I think we all feel it.
It's just
We
where
all
the
feel the
towns
weight
are
of it.
located. Raleigh and Newbury are right next to each other.
Yeah,
You gotta go through a city, over a river to get to us.
Right.
So there is some people in Salisbury that have resentment on some of that, and they're gonna wanna make sure that their voice is heard.
I don't think that's any less true of the other towns. I can tell you there are a lot of people in other towns who would say they feel more akin to Salisbury than they do to their neighboring town, whichever town they're from.
Yeah, I understand that, but you gotta understand that we're not attached to you guys.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, I talked to someone who, there's literally 5 people, I think, in the district with her particular job recently, and she was like, well, are we gonna be represented? And I was like, you know what? At some point, like, either you're gonna be called in to be part of the discussion, or we're gonna have an open night and you're gonna come out and speak, or an afternoon, or you're gonna go to your principal and say, you know, like, I have this concern, can you raise it for me? And that's the process, right? And it doesn't matter what role you're in the district, or, you know, what town you happen to live in, or whether you're an alumni or not, or anything like that,
We know
right?
being alumni, us 3, we're 3 Salisbury alumni.
Yeah.
We know we got treated different.
Well, we have to try and,
I don't know.
I think that's just it. I mean, I think that needs to be changed.
We're all gonna be well
Well,
represented.
we're
I have
represented.
complete
but
faith in the
There
diverse.
is, what I'm trying to say is, there, and you guys, neither one of you can't deny it, there is that sentiment in Salisbury. You can't deny it. It's, you gotta know your people.
and it's why I'm chuckling, because it was my exact words that when this goes, this will be a topic of discussion, and I think that's why I'm kind of like,
I would say the other piece of this.
we all
to-
thought of it.
Absolutely. And I think, yes, it's on me to make sure that the balance of these groups, specifically school council, student council, and John Skanicki and I, with the recommendations for the 2 community members, is to make sure that the 3 towns are equally represented. And then with those recommendations come up, then the school committee has an opportunity. I think back to the original, what we started talking about is there's the school of thought of a huge committee. And as we talked through that was what we said, we can't do that. Not because, love the idea of the representation, right? Make sure there's 30 people from each town. We get 100 people, awesome.
Get nothing done.
But nothing gets done, right? And I think we talked a lot about the role of this group is organizing the process. It's a lot of ugly meetings, like we talk about the fun part, and then you get into the design, or I'm sorry, into the actual construction and all of that, and it doesn't matter where you're from or what you're doing, it's just not fun, right? So I think it's key that this is, and I think it's been said, we plan, and I guarantee you, we guarantee you that this is going to be an open, transparent, always televised, roaming around in different places so we can get more input, student input, staff input. Paul Mayette had talked about, a committee member had talked about being in, as an educator, being in, I think you were nodding too, Kelly, right? Being an educator and being in these buildings and thinking, there was no educator involved in making that decision, right? So we want to make sure that we have lots of opportunity, talking today about building controls and, my gosh, there's lots of opportunity, but this group is leading the charge. It's not the voice, it's just the organizer, right? So.
And it
I think
still
that's an
comes in
important
front
point.
of the school committee for all.
Right. And on each
Final decision.
project that you have, you need somebody who guides it and gets input.
I think the people of Salisbury, because Salisbury watches all these things,
I understand.
believe it or not, and I know sure Raleigh and Newry do, but Salisbury's very heavily watching community TV. You just gave them the answer, so I don't have to explain that. Thank you.
They will see a very balanced process.
Everything that the school committee and Brian does is always open and
I know
transparent.
that, but.
And they can always come find us. I mean, I'm at every field imaginable.
I know.
You have right there. So, I mean, and we welcome it. I know it seems weird, but we do welcome it. Like, if they're seeing this on TV and you see us out, stop and ask us what's being represented or what matters. We're here.
Except in the express lane at Market Basket.
Do not. Do not. If I make it in 20 items or less, do not stop me. That was a feat in of
When I
itself.
got elected, I gave up going to a Market Basket. I don't know. Allow my wife to it. I don't do it.
I can't send my husband. It's
Oh
worse.
my God. The meat aisle, no way am I staying there.
Yeah, don't get caught. Also, don't talk to me in Delhi. I will miss my number.
So, I think the other thing too, just real quick, is I think Brian was talking about, being the organizers, that group being the organizers, but it's also super important that communication is going both ways, because not everybody's gonna be able to tune in and watch a video. Not everybody is gonna have the time to sit down and go through minutes. So part of it, I think, at looking at those individuals that are on that committee, is making sure that every single one of those people has to be very consciously engaged in two-way communication. They're bringing it back to the building committee, and they're bringing it from the building committee back to their community as well.
These guys hate me. I share every single.
Until they hate you.
Actually, the principals, the whole. They got the meeting, and so I make sure I share even while you're in meetings. So,
Does anybody have any other?
I was gonna ask real quick, it might be good if at the town meetings, do a presentation on where we are.
Like this coming May?
Yes, I think ours is the last one.
Or April, yeah. Yeah, we definitely can. Again, it's a school committee and the superintendent's president and involvement at town meetings is by invitation. It's an interesting arrangement as a regional school, but I mean, I certainly would be welcome, and I know committee members would be welcome, just to give a quick update. Specifically, I think it's a good point, Richard, because I think specifically it's, when are you coming for that override vote, right? We know an override vote is coming, but when are we getting there? I think that's an important question to answer, depending on how the towns are trying to manage your own finances, which I know is challenging. So again, just to clarify, if we are welcomed into eligibility, I don't think I said this, by this fall would be the goal. Generally, the message is you're generally bringing a vote 3 years from being welcomed in, right? So if we were welcomed in December of '24, their assumption is we're done with this first period, all this stuff, by December of '25. By December of '27, which probably wouldn't have a meeting in December, so it would be in the spring or in the winter. Our goal, right, pull back the period or eligibility period back to the end of summer, so we're rolling by the fall, we're not waiting to December, and hopefully accelerating that study work, because we've done a lot of work, right? Mike was involved, we have different folks involved with the towns, with the facility subcommittee, that ideally we're getting that to spring of '27, right? So I'd say on an aggressive schedule, that would be our probably best case scenario at this point, would be spring of '27, potentially more likely fall of '27. It would obviously be a special town meeting for that. But I think that's a good point. That would be an opportunity to share.
Can I just add to that, though? We may not, and I can only speak from Salisbury, we may want it in the fall, because the spring meeting is always the budget, and that's
Yeah.
when it's already sometimes controversial about things that are going on. Fall is like, here's our free cash, what do we want to spend it on, you know?
Let's
Some
not
of
make
them are
that one
happier
worse.
in the fall than they are in the spring, so.
We like happy.
Yes,
Vote we want happy.
yeah. I mean, just saying, that's,
Refreshments?
it
Yeah.
it may be received a little better when it's not, here's Triton's budget, and by the way, down, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a
We
good
need
point.
to bring snacks to spring
we've
town
been-
meeting, because it's,
We got a bag.
I was going to
Just
say,
gotta
vote
throw
on
them
the
out.
budget first and then give the presentation.
Well, we might have a brand new
Yeah, so I think-
moderator that's going to be really badass like her father was.
heavily mic'd.
Yeah, I think we're a little bit away. We're a little bit away from being able to clarify the exact date. I think spring of 2027 is probably aggressive anyway. Fall is far more likely. So that's certainly a discussion. As we go through, that's an opportunity for sure.
And it's a 270-day window, right, to pass it?
Oh, from the time, yes.
So it's not like anybody even has to be together. It could be like you pass it and then somebody else decides to have their town meeting a month later.
Oh, that's a good point,
It's
so,
not,
okay.
it's not like, it's not, I don't want to invoke the one from last January.
Right.
But, right, it's not like that where everybody's voting on the same day. It does, that's not, that's
It's
not.
not like a budget override where you basically have to pass it in May.
Three.
Okay.
Right, so, right, exactly, as far as getting, yep. Right, so it's when we're welcomed, it's to move from 1 into 2 is a vote of the MSBA board, 2 to 3 is consecutive, 4 is a vote of the board, and then it's the end of that is when so that's that welcome at the end of 4. That vote happens, then you've got the 270 days to fund it.
Any other questions? We're going to move on to the FY '26.
Yeah, wait,
And then that's me, huh?
saw that coming.
The other one, I just say Brian and I'm good.
I'll take it.
Windows.
My glasses for this. So the document you have in front of you was not attached to board docs. I'm not sure how many people look on board docs, but when it was posted, this is all information we were getting yesterday, this morning, as it was published with the governor's budget. So at this point, you know that the school committee heard directly from principals and other administrators last Tuesday and Wednesday evening, 10 separate presentations. That was that each principal, for example, came to talk about the requests and the needs for their specific building, and then administrators for their specific departments. The requests are not a done budget, right? That is not how this process works. It's the assumption is the school committee wants to hear about the needs so they can have an open discussion about what they want and feel like we can prioritize. This Saturday, 2 days from now, or a day and a half from now at 8 a.m., they'll hold the annual budget workshop, get around a table, go through a summary of all those requests, and start to talk through what may or may not be possible. What you have in front of you tonight is not reflective of any of that discussion. What I can tell you is, I don't think it's any different from our member towns or any other school or city in the Commonwealth. Our costs are going up. The driver this year is healthcare. It's right now an assumption. I'm guessing you're all hearing.
Yeah, they're talking about 25%.
Yeah, Newbury and Raleigh are both Maya. I know Salisbury is not. But we've been told there will be districts, and they're having their annual meeting. There'll be cities, towns, members of Maya who are going to see a 20-plus renewal. Our rep doesn't believe we're in that category, but certainly at this point we've assumed a 15% increase. That's a $960,000 increase just for health and dental. Again, that's all active health, all retiree, Blue Cross, as well as the medic supplement. So that is obviously a huge driver in the budget that the committee will look at, close to $1 million. Right now, the cost of doing business going into next year is around $3.2 million, $3.1 million, inclusive of that million. I don't want to make any assumptions, right? There's no assumption that that's a number that's palatable. That's not the intention of this discussion tonight. I just wanted to share with you that's where we're at just as a cost of doing business. The drivers on personnel and COLAs and the others are no different than they have been in recent years. Really, it's the healthcare is the big driver. Second bigger driver is, that we rebid our transportation contract. We had two bidders, NRT and Coach Company came to the table. Coach was outbid by 800 and some odd thousand collectively over the 5 years. I think I can say publicly there's been a couple months of angsty discussions with the committee. I'm sure you hear from your constituents that it has not been a positive experience. It's been, since COVID, it's been challenging. The last couple months have been extreme and not acceptable. So we've spent a lot of time working with and talking to NRT, and it's now owned by Beacon Mobility. Their vice president, we've had meetings, and so they've upped the salary, the starting salary for drivers. They've done competitive retention bonuses. So they're doing lots of work to improve that. This is about driver shortage, right? It's not about the vehicles or anything else. It's about buses not running because there's no people to drive them. And we've also implemented pretty extensive penalties, which was not in previous contracts. So we are hopeful that with that combination, that by September of next year, when those routes roll out, that we will be in a better place. Our goal has been with them, we need 2 more runs. We need 1 more in Salisbury and 1 more in Rowley to get to where we think is adequate coverage for the routes. But we've got 19 now. We'll take the 19 if we have some backups, because the most disruptive thing is when a bus doesn't show up. They're already tight, but when most recently it's been, was it the 2 days after last weekend, Monday and the Tuesday, they had 4 call-outs. So they had 15 drivers for 19 routes. So the dispatcher was running a route, and they got to the point where they were doing routes and then going back out and picking up the second route. So the kids were half hour late.
At least, yeah.
At least a half hour late. Yeah, and those were the single-digit days. Yep. So it was this awful confluence of bad scenarios. So we're hopeful. This isn't something they quickly fix. Those penalties aren't in place right now. Those all go into place with the new contract come July 1. So I'm hopeful for the future. All that said, even though they won the bid and NRT outbid Coach by $800,000 and change collectively over 5 years, our budget's still going up $230,000 for yellow bus transportation alone. So that is a roughly 12-point-something% increase. And I feel disgusting saying it, but we were actually a little bit relieved, because there's many cities and towns that have seen a 20%, 30%. There are 45% I just saw. So in rates, I forget the rate we're going to. We're 388. There were rates $500-$600 each for a double tier run per day. So yeah, it continues to be a really challenging industry. So we'll leave it at that. But so even with that, I mean, close to $250,000 for transportation is included in that $3.1 million level services figure as well. So not a lot more to add there, because the committee hasn't even discussed what their priorities are. But what you have in front of you is a document that just attempts to outline the 2 data points that we wait every January for every year for. That is minimum local contributions and our foundation enrollment. Again, just want to reiterate, we've often had the discussion, it's enrollment, how difficult can it be to have that number earlier? Foundation enrollment is a complex formula, and it includes data points that we don't have. And so we can get close, but it is a calculation done by the state on data that we report to them, and there are several other factors that are added in on their end. So the first and largest impact this year is the minimum local contribution. As a reminder, I think everyone's aware, we've had a few discussions recently about the regional agreement. We've agreed we don't want to talk about an alternative assessment. That leaves us with a regional agreement that calls for the statutory formula. We have no option there. It is what is written in statute, so every town pays their minimum local contribution, which is set by the state, and then the amount that's above the collective minimum local contributions is divided according to the enrollment percentage. At the top there, you can see Rowley had a significantly larger minimum local contribution increase this year. That's largely based on the municipal rate growth factor. That is not something that we are involved in setting. That comes from the Division of Local Services. But you can see there, Newbury had an increase in their required, sometimes it's called the required contribution. The minimum local contribution or required contribution increased by $78,000 and change, an increase of 1.1%. Rowley, an increase of $473,000 and change, an increase of 6.12%. And then Salisbury's increased by $187,000 and change for a little over 2% increase. That is the first step in the formula. So obviously, when you have one town growing by 1%, another town by 2%, and one town growing by 6%, there's obviously going to be a disparity there. So that came through, obviously, in the calculations. And then secondarily to that, we look at enrollments, foundation enrollment. So we've continued to talk about the fact that we are communities of residents who are aging in place. Folks are not moving out of their homes, so while there are homes being built, and certainly there is some turnover, largely the population is aging, and students, school-age residents are on the decline across the North Shore, the state as a whole, outside of larger urban areas. So you can see the change in enrollment. Newbury decreased down to 605, a decrease of 12 students, or 1.94%. Rowley decreased by 19, or 2.68%. Salisbury decreased by 31 students, or 3.73%. Again, that would argue, with Newbury having the smallest decrease, that they would cease or could absorb some of that impact. But the fact that they had that smallest minimum local contribution increase is a far stronger component of the formula that enrollment couldn't override, if you will. So the table down the bottom that has the blue heading, it says hypothetical. I don't know how many times it can say example. This is not a recalculation. This is not an assessment. This is not any change. This is a way of showing you what those two figures did to our budget. So for the current year, where it says FY25 adjusted, those are your assessments. Just over $12 million for Newbury, about 13.36 for Rowley, and about 15.9 million for Salisbury. You're collectively assessed $41,296,953. Second box over, where it says example, that's the same $41,296,953, just layering in the minimum local contributions and the enrollments for next year into the formula. And you can see that it took away almost 163,000 from Salisbury. It took about 83,000 and a half from Newbury, and it gave it to Rowley, 246,000 more. So that, unfortunately, I know we continue to talk about this, and every year it's a discussion about which town is going to be on the short end of the stick. That is the starting point, right? So before we talk about an increase, that's what happens with we talk about level services, which is the cost increase of just providing the same level of services. That's a zero increase budget. If we said we can have no new money, Rowley's assessment still goes up $246,000. So we share that with you not to say and take any or make any suggestion of where that final number will be with an assessment. There's no examples here for what it would look like for next year, because there's lots of discussion for the committee to have. But I just wanted to make sure people were clear about those numbers. Again, enrollment is obviously involved. We are involved in that. Those are numbers we report to the state and they massage in their own way. The minimum local contribution, while it takes into account student enrollment, obviously your portion, it's a larger part of your town's wealth as the state would define your wealth. Not our definition of wealth, the state's definition of wealth. The one thing I should add, as a reminder, foundation enrollment includes all those students for whom you are responsible. So it is your Rowley students who are attending the Triton schools. It is your Rowley students who are attending the charter school. It is your Rowley students who are attending other Massachusetts schools through school choice. It doesn't include Whittier, Essex Tech, private schools, homeschools. So that's inclusive of all those because you are responsible as they are residents of your town. Last thing on the bottom before we have a discussion. I don't imagine this is, oh, thanks, Brian, let's be gone. The governor has kicked off the budget process proposing $75 minimum aid per pupil. That's higher. Again, Student Opportunity Act codified $30 per pupil. Last year we landed at $104 per pupil. It's certainly nice that we're starting at 75. I get the sense there's an appetite for that, if not more. So this, any calculations as we start to go into Saturday and have those discussions with the committee, will assume $156,900 in new Chapter 70. We have not made any change in our regional transportation. If you dig into the budget, because I know some of you do, the total number for regional transportation actually dropped roughly 20,000 from the current year. There's another line that's vocational regional transportation, reimbursed for vocational transportation, that they increased to $50 million. They used one-time funds, millionaire's tax funds. That figure, that line really only cost $7-8 million. That overage, by definition or by language, defaults over to regional transportation. So there's this discussion about the regional transportation line is actually much, much higher. Some have said it's up to 95%. Jay Sullivan from the Department of Ed, I will layer no opinions here. It's 80 to 85. That's what the cherry sheet says. So there's lots of interpretation of what regional transportation will do, specifically because there's that chunk carved out with one-time funds. There isn't a lot of consensus on the Hill about how to use those one-time funds, and there will be a lot of pushback to fund any operating year-over-year costs using one-time pots of cash. So anything we talk about moving forward, we'll get clarification as we move towards March 12th in the final budget. We probably won't have too much by a tentative budget on February 12th. We'll hopefully have a updated healthcare number. But as far as state revenues, it's going to be a while. But if those generally don't tweak because those gain steam later in March, April, May, and June after we've finalized our budget. So the assumptions moving forward, you would see level regional transportation unless we learn something new with this fund new calculation. And it would include everything else level except for Chapter 70, which is increasing by $156,900. I will stop talking and answer any questions.
What was the regional transportation amount last year?
It's like 190 or 92 million, and it's down to 70.
What was the percentage? Sorry, I see it better.
So the current year?
Yeah.
We don't know.
No, last year.
I want to say it was 79.4, I think was where it ended up. It was like
Hadn't hit
around
80 yet.
80%.
Yeah, it didn't hit 80.
For fiscal 24?
Pretty sure.
To look that up.
Go back and look.
I mean, the reason why I ask is this is always one that's a fight because it was a promise to be 100% and it never fulfilled the promise. It was as low as 60-something% years ago. So it's going forward, but this I know is one thing that we can at least fight for. This is something we can fight for to at least say, could you go as high as you can go? Like this is a little, not, we don't have teeth, but we have at least a little bit of a voice in the regional transportation reimbursement.
Yes.
So last year it was right under 80, so.
Yeah.
So
We won't know this year until June, because they wait until everything's in to true it up at the end of the year. I think this year too, I mean, we've been having this conversation because we have our own internal advocacy group for school committee, and they go and talk to our legislators. I think we have a very strong, much stronger chance than we've had in the past to push up the per pupil minimum aid that's sitting currently at $75. I think the reason that it's sitting so high is because more and more districts are not getting the true education funding increases. They're only getting minimum aid. As of this year, it pushes up to 73% of the districts in Massachusetts in the governor's budget that are only getting minimum aid through Chapter 70. So that's a much higher percentage of senators and representatives that are representing schools and districts, right, that are only seeing that $75 per pupil. So I think there's, in the past, you know, people have said like, the real Chapter 70 number is where we kind of want to funnel money because, right, there were a lot more districts that are getting that. As fewer and fewer districts are getting that, we have a better chance of pushing up the $75. It was $104 per pupil last year, and that was with roughly 20 to 30 fewer districts getting that per pupil minimum aid.
And I know we've had talks over the years about how we're getting closer and closer to not be hold harmless. How close are we?
Honestly, I didn't look at this.
Maybe we're in the other direction.
Sorry, Norris.
No. We only got the numbers. They literally came out at like 3 o'clock yesterday, so.
We made progress when with the years of high inflation, there was progress, and that's when early in the Student Opportunity Act implementation, districts were seeing lots of new money, and now the hold harmless districts are growing, the number of, so it's actually, we're working in reverse, unfortunately, with lower and more realistic inflationary rates. So,
I mean, just because, was it Newburyport last year that came out of hold harmless and they got an extra like $1.something million? I mean, it was kind of crazy. So.
That was like, was that fiscal 24?
So, okay, 2 years ago.
I think it was 1.1.
So we just need to try to get more kids in our
Yeah.
towns.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably more appetite for minimum aid than there is regional transportation, again, being one of 85 academic regions. We have a smaller voice than the 270 some odd districts.
That's fair. So we're fighting for the Chapter 70 versus regional transportation.
That doesn't mean we don't. Yeah.
Both, but.
Yeah. Rep. Kastner co-sponsored a bill with Rep. Scarsdale that interesting language actually requires that DESE requests full funding, which is an interesting approach.
Saw that. I was actually
I think there's some
I was
folks
very interested in that.
may have had a comment about Jay Sullivan, right? I think there's some sentiment that the information that is coming out of DESE is not advocating for 100% reimbursement. Jay has openly said, I will never advocate for that because if we fund 100% of it, you lose all your motivation to get aggressive and reasonable rates. I highly disagree. So that's an interesting approach. That when Kristen had sent the language to me, or Rep. Kastner, I'm sorry, had sent the language to me, I literally had to read, I'm like, that makes no sense. And then the more we were talking about it, I'm like, it actually is a novel approach. Rep. Scarsdale's of Western Mass.
Well, not only that, the amount of bus companies that you have to choose from is getting less and less.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know? And actually, a lot of school districts are actually rejecting the contracts that they're getting from their bus companies. Not that they have others, but at least it's making our legislators sit up and take notice. You know, because when you're rejecting your bus contracts, who are you going to be going to? And you're going to be complaining to your legislators that you're not doing enough to stop the monopolizing of
That's crazy how
It's already
monopoly
a
it is.
monopoly already.
But really, when you reject your bus all due respect to other districts, when you reject your bus contract, like, it's likely that your next bids are going to be the same or higher.
Right.
So I'm not sure that they do anything other than make a non-viable protest in rejecting their bids.
Well, I think it was more as a protest to our legislators to say, look at this. This is the only bus contract that we have.
I guess we just can't afford to do that.
No,
Right? We
no.
can't afford for you, for the towns, to do that
No.
because
There's no alternative.
I'm
Well,
not,
and this year there was two, but,
you know,
Brian, are you? We didn't think there would be two.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Are you looking at a $3 billion increase? Is that what you're,
For what?
So I would say,
overall budget?
so I would say the summary of the level services budget is about $3.1 million. I cannot say we're looking at a $3.1 million budget. That's the discussion on Saturday
Okay.
as to what.
This is just an example. It's not
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
actual number that's
Yeah,
being
I just know
presented
they're
as what
gonna
we're
go
going
for an
with.
override anyhow, just to pay our bills.
Okay.
And I don't know if an override this year and an override next year is going to hurt an override for the school. That's what we're concerned about. People aren't going to do it. But,
For the school building, you mean like for the?
well, I don't know. We're going to have an override this year. So that's just going to Band-Aid this year to pay the bills. So we're going to probably have to have another one next year.
Operation?
In addition to one for the school. I don't know that people will go for the school. I don't want that jeopardized, but we can't handle $700,000, $800,000, $900,000. We've been saying it, and now it has caught up to us. We don't even have free cash to go into. We just don't have it.
So I guess,
You can be mindful of that on Saturday.
I mean, I guess a couple of thoughts on that. One of them is that most towns don't go for an override. Frequently, they don't do it year after year. That's not something they do.
No, we don't, and we haven't.
Right, so they typically go for more than what they need in that given year, because the second year, obviously, you can't, right? You can't keep asking the voters to go for more than Prop 2.5. So I'd be surprised, I guess, if you got the advice to go for 2 in a row. I think it would be, I don't know, my guess would be that the strategy would be different. I think the other thing is that, like last year, right, we saw some high, we saw low contract renegotiations for the union, right? But they were higher than what we had seen in the past, which increased our budget numbers. You know, we're always looking at this as when you have those sort of level services numbers, they're a one piece in a big pie, right? So it's not something that we look at solely. And then the other thing I would say is we know that that healthcare is going to be high, but it does vary. We'll have a better range come this weekend after Maya has their meeting, and then we'll have an even, we'll have our actual rate. What is it? Look at Brian Perry.
Second.
Second week of February?
I think the second, right?
Usually
It's obviously going up here in town, too. We're negotiating with 3 unions right now.
You're with Maya. Aren't you with Maya?
Up right
Healthcare,
now.
Maya.
Yeah. And our town employees can never, ever get a decent raise. And we don't want to have to go with them with 1%. You know, our firefighters, our police officers, our highway, all of them, at some point, they need to have a decent raise. And every year, we go through this. Every year, we say, we can't do it, we can't do it, we can't do it. We really can't do it this year without an override.
Understood. So I
I don't
understand
want to
that.
jeopardize
Yeah.
an override for the school, but
I think the final piece that I want to make here is we have no control over the municipal revenue growth factor. That's a piece that's hitting you straight off with $500,000. And it's nothing that the district has any input into. I don't know You know, I live here in Raleigh, like, I hear it, I know a lot of the people that are sitting on these departments, but I also think to some extent, like, we can hear you, we can listen, we can take it into account, but there are pieces where our hands are just tied because we're just handed a number. And we've tried, wherever there.
And that's how we feel too, you know, when
Any
you get
options.
a bill, I'm all for the school. I wasn't initially interested in it, I am now supporting a new school. But for years, you know, we're just handed a bill from Triton, that's how it's perceived. And our employees get nothing. You know, I don't have the heart to go to them and tell them 1%. You know, when they don't get dental, they get bare minimum. Every one of my departments has openings because we can't get anybody to come here and work for what we pay.
Yes, yes.
You know, so I guess I'm just asking if there's something that you can cut or change or do, we have to consider it.
So I will say, another piece on the healthcare is that we're in negotiations through the PEC this year, and Christine Nealand sits, she's the municipal representation on that negotiation. So I would make sure she's hearing what you're saying.
Which, by the way, her apologies, she's sick.
Everybody is.
Her biggest fear is that she's going to give it to those grandbabies.
And if Chris were here, I would say the other day in the meeting, she echoed that exact thing. So
Yes.
I was going to
in
say,
fairness to her, she is representing that.
Yes.
I was going to say
Yeah,
that
you were
she-
there too.
Yep, it was
Definitely shared
very clearly shared at the meeting, on the PC meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the challenge, and again, this isn't a statement about what the number will be, when you look at that swing of Rowley up, again, just using that as an example, that discrepancy is going to be added to any new spending as well, right? So without even doing any scenarios, I can tell you, Newbury is going to have the best year. Salisbury, well, that's not, I guess as a percentage increase, Salisbury will have the best year. Newbury's the second, and then Rowley's will be the most challenging, right? I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. That's what it's going to be because of that discrepancy created by the minimum local contribution. I was just going to make a joke about the regional agreement.
Don't make a joke.
No, not a good time.
People want to have
I was
that.
gonna make one too, Brian, but I'm sitting here in this corner very quiet.
Bring up the regional agreement. Only Salisbury has
Say it very quiet.
said that they would continue to look for an alternative assessment. Both Newbury and Rowley turned it down, and when you're complaining about, not complaining, but you're
Expressing.
expressing your frustration with the challenges of the town, it just bewilders me why the towns wouldn't try and come up with some type of alternative assessment so that you're in control of your own increases, and you'd know it happened much more sooner than March, when we get it. I'm sure if that committee got back together, it would be hard to come up with what the assessments would be, but it would be worth and fruitful for the towns to do this. Every year this is going, let's just put it on the table, the school budget is never going down unless the state contributes more money. So,
And I will just say, so we've had the discussion about, I think it was the last DCC meeting, when we were in Newbury, talking about the fact that Newbury's decreasing at the slowest rate and is actually seeing some of the largest incoming, over the last couple of years, the largest incoming kindergartens. That appears to be the case again this incoming next year. But I think this is an example of Newbury did shrink the least. Salisbury almost, as far as the numbers, almost 3 times as many students, less. But that municipal rate growth factor, right, that minimum local contribution is clearly the driving force in the budget. So even with that enrollment swing, if Rowley didn't have such a discrepant minimum local contribution, Newbury would likely be seeing, because you took an additional 0.3, right, of the pie, when we talk about the pie, step 2, Newbury's percentage went up 0.3%. So if so you should be thanking Rowley, right? So I mean, literally. So, but that's where it comes down to, where it's always one town, and sometimes it's enrollment, sometimes it's minimum, or required minimum local contribution. This year, MLC's played the biggest driver, and Rowley got whacked.
Yeah, but again, although when the chair is right, we had this discussion. I think we'll be later. We're in the point. Newbury and Raleigh made it very clear. We don't want to have the discussions no more. So they want to live with whatever DESI gives us. That's what they chose. So I mean, it's not in a discussion. So we're stuck with what we have through DESI.
And that's why we brought this document, so that you can see even before we even start talking about the school budget. These are numbers that are given to us by the state, and we have no control over where you even start. Does anybody have anything else?
I guess I just want to go back and say, like, as far as I'm concerned, I watch a lot of board meetings, right? I deal with a lot of different boards. We put in so much time in trying to understand how this all works. I'd say as a school committee, we have probably the best understanding as a whole of how our budget works. Almost any of us can talk to the individual line items on this budget, like down into 2 or 3 levels deep. We have a better understanding than almost any school committee, I'd say, collectively in the state on how the state funding works. When I talk to school committees and they cannot identify their state representatives on site who are in the room with them, and every single one of us, our state representatives and our senators, can identify on site, and we can identify all of them. Like, I just want to say, like, I feel the pain. I live in Rowley. Rowley's been hit the last few years. I know so many people in Salisbury. Salisbury had been hit previous to that. Newbury had been hit back in the early 2000s. I ran for this committee to try and find the fat, and I got on here and I spent 9 of my 10 years in finance committee signing off on every single invoice and payroll that came in here, and I cannot find any more. Like, any place that I found any when Brian was
Like offensive.
school business official.
Can you just be honest? It was aggressive. Not
And
offensive,
Narissa
aggressive.
trained all of the incoming
Finance.
I mean, I learned how to look through warrants painstakingly, paper by paper, because Narissa, Brian, and then at the time, Kyle.
This isn't about who we are or
No,
to say that, like,
but I want to
just want to say we're doing our best. I don't know of anything that we could be doing better than what we're doing right now. I don't, we've tried to turn over every rock, and I will sincerely apologize to all the towns, because I know it's difficult to be in your seats, and I don't think we can do anything more. And if you have ideas on what more we could be doing, I'm all ears. I
think we already gave up that discussion then.
Okay.
Well, I also
think
want to
we-
say, if you listen to the principals and what they asked for,
I will listen to everyone.
was
It's
not-
not extreme. None of them asked anything
these
extreme.
were well thought out, data driven. I mean, they went down into percentages of where students are in the building to ask for certain things, and I won't speak, to everything they asked, but it's public. But each principal, I think, really sat down and understood the assignment. They understood that financial times are hard. They understood that contracts have gone up, cost of living, health insurance. So when they made those requests, when they made those presentations, they are not asking for like brand new desks all over the building. They're not asking for TVs. Everything that was asked is student driven, right down to their specific population's needs by town. It was it was impressive how thoughtful it was, and it's a testament to what Norris is saying. I think everyone that is a part of Triton working on these budgets in some form has really understood where everyone stands and the community's needs for their own community, and then as for Triton, I know Patrick and Al really have looked at all three communities' needs, and what they asked for reflects it. Actually, I'm not quite sure Al asked
He didn't ask.
for anything, to be clear.
No, I was gonna say-
I was going to say, wait a minute, Al asked for.
Was that position the kind of social worker at the high school
Yeah.
that they talked
Yeah.
about together?
So right down to even owning, like, he could have asked for things, and he stepped back and said,
He
currently,
actually
right now.
definited the elementary schools'
Yep,
needs.
he did. So I hear you, and I've sat on this committee a few years, and when I first started, it was Salisbury. And I remember having very similar conversations with Salisbury Select Board. I hear you, and I mean, Saturday, we don't take it lightly. We are all in on this budget, all 9 of us. Brian and Brian are sick of hearing from us, I think, at some point. So just to back up what Nurse is saying, I think, I don't know where the fat is, but we will look for it. We always do, as a whole. That's just what we do, because we don't want to charge a community for something that's really not necessary to the students' well-being and health and academic value.
Plus, like Ronnie, obviously I listen to Ronnie a lot on this matter. Historically, what's going on with teachers' unions, if anyone in any of our 3 towns think this is the highest number, it's not. It's all going up. So, I know Salisbury, our board is constantly talking, realizing that it could be a couple more $1 million on top of that 15 million that we pay. We're realizing that. And, we have to do an override for budgetly. We're trying to, we hired, like I said before, we hired the economic developer. We're trying to develop some of our balance here, trying to balance it. But for any of us, all 3 towns, not realize that 12 million is not staying the same, 13 million is not staying the same, 15 is not staying the same. It's just not coming. We all have to realize, unfortunately, I feel bad because I know some of your firefighters and your police officers, and like Narissa, all 4 of us, you have all around us, all alumni. We all went to school with half the people in all 3 of these towns. We get it. But unfortunately, because of how the state allocates funds to our communities, we're stuck holding the bill. And our board is doing everything we can, realizing that this is a low number. We got to get higher than that. We got to be in front of this board, of the school. And, Ronnie says flat out, what do you think they're increasing?
Yeah, that's the conversation I had with the Salisbury Select Board after Marblehead, Gloucester, and Beverly that was a domino effect. Like negotiation, whenever we negotiate, that again, as a teacher, I'm like, oh wow, that's great. It's $30,000 more than I'm making right now. But I was like, those towns are screwed. And I'm worried about when we go to renegotiate what that will mean for us. So, and that was the feedback I gave to our board when we saw, because I saw what Beverly, Gloucester, and Marblehead gave their teachers. It's kind of crazy.
I will just take a moment or the opportunity to shout out our associations in that they have been, I would say, whatever the word is, not willing to participate, even working with obviously we're an MTA school, so even working with their MTA state rep and making sure that is not coming here. So I do want to say that our educators have gone above and beyond to make sure they're saying that is not the approach we want to take. I don't want to be naive and say that and think that things couldn't change. But as we move into negotiations, we'll be in the thick of it a year from now. In the fall, we'll start. I don't anticipate that, and it's in large part because of their approach, in that they understand the reasoned approach the committee has taken, which is we don't want to be the highest paid, we don't want to be the lowest paid, we need to be competitive. And so they have understood that. I think the majority of them understand you're kind of a north of Boston, smaller community, and that's okay, and that's where they want to be because of the places these are, the schools, they want to be in these schools, our schools. But I did want to just take that opportunity. And I will say, too, the one, just to not to kind of belabor this conversation, but just to change it a little bit with regard to the increases for next year, and especially the way the principals and other administrators understand this, is that some of these costs we're already feeling this year. So Finance Subcommittee, anyone's welcome to attend, always super exciting, once a month. Brian goes through the numbers, there's a general fund, a revolving, right? And we are frozen. This budget is frozen, and I know because I watched the high school principal walk past to check with Brian, and he's like, I need like $111. So, right, so this is, we're already at that point because we've had overages we've talked about in areas, whether it be a student leaving because of an out-of-district placement or $50,000 repair to the building that is needed on a tight tank or something else. So that's real this year. So if we had fluff, we wouldn't have to do that. We wouldn't have to freeze the budget. And so that's the reality at this point.
And plus, do you feel that healthcare is going to stay the same cost? Because you already said that 20% this year. I mean, you just the article just came out with a $2.1 billion mistake. Baker and Healy's blaming on Baker, but that's going to have to be paid for too.
Yeah, so our rep, who I don't know if we share the same rep, but we're with Maya, which is Rowley and Newbury share as well, is they've told us to expect double digits for at least the next 3 years.
So that's a cost right there.
As an industry standard.
That's a cost right there.
Mm-hmm.
That's a cost that's baked into the contract, so you can't just say, oh, I'm going to change, I'm going to take your dental away.
Yeah, so I mean, just to reiterate, as Narissa or someone mentioned, so we negotiate all of our health care with a single body called the Public Employee Committee. So the committee enacted that, I don't remember, like 15 years ago. So it's not negotiated with teachers and then with IAs and then custodians and then cafeteria workers. It's collective, including there's a retiree voice at the table. So there is the ability to change. Right? I mean, the district could force into the GIC, which at this point would probably be more expensive. But that is an opportunity, and that is a discussion. We mentioned Christine Nealand is the representative on that group. And is certainly, there is an approach that this isn't just we're cool with whatever happens this year. There's a different level of need.
And, to stay competitive, I know things change year to year, right? The teachers' union's good this year. You just say it's not good next year when they have talked to some of the model teachers, or it could be. I will side on the air of caution that it's going to go up because that's the trend.
Mm-hmm.
So the trend changes. Unfortunately, we all have our own greed, right? I can tell you, every single teacher at Triton, if they can get wind that they're going to get $30,000 more a year like other communities have, they're going to be thinking about it. You can't say they're not going to be.
Stop planting seeds, right?
No, but, I mean,
I'm not.
Terry, cover this mic.
You know me by now. I'm a reality person.
I know. Are you kicking him under the
the
table?
reality is, Marblehead, Gloucester, and Beverly won't be able to sustain that either. They're going to end up with cuts around
Yeah.
teachers.
Well, look what
So
happened
then-
to Andover.
Right, and so then when they start to see, oh, wonderful, we got more, but now we have no IAs in the class, and we have no this, we have no that, because there are all the cuts. Hopefully,
They realize it.
they
We hopefully
realize
do,
that
but
it wasn't gratis.
One last data point. In the midst of those strikes, there was a ruling made at the state level that reversed historic precedent, decades old, in that an organization was required to continue bargaining in good faith if a unit struck. That was overturned at the state level. And so that will likely have a chilling effect because obviously I think it was in the middle, I think Marblehead had already settled, but Gloucester and Beverly were still out. They were, 90% of the way into the strike. It's hard to just say we're going to stop negotiating because they were close. But certainly, if that were to happen, we can say, then we'll stop negotiating if you're going to strike. So that is a positive change, and that I think will have a chilling effect in a positive way on both sides to make sure that we maintain progress in negotiating so that we don't get to that point. So that is a positive outcome. Yeah.
I'm totally positive about coming. And I know a lot of the teachers, they're great people. But,
It's not going to happen.
I just want people to understand that the committee takes what we do very seriously. We've broken up our subcommittees into 3 subcommittees. 4. Well, 4, the facility subcommittee. But you have the ENN, which negotiates the medical and with the teachers. You have the finance, who looks at every single sanitary cent done in the district. And then you have ENA, which we advocate to our senators and other individuals to fight for what our students and our communities need. So
And keep track of all the policies and the changes and the updates.
exactly. And we just make sure that it's broken up so that it really is driven down into the very thing that you're talking about, of really looking at everything that we do. And I agree with Marissa. I mean, we're fortunate to have Marissa know Chapter 70 as well as she does. And
We bring Narissa up at our meetings all the time. We're always
absolutely.
complimenting her. She's tireless. I heard your dedication, and we
She's my Facebook lawyer.
so fortunate.
She's so good.
Absolutely, and she tries to
Couldn't have someone
educate.
just step in and replace her. There's no way. We know that.
That and Marissa, you gotta stick around a while.
Nowhere to go.
Every time we see her, she tells us.
And that's why I'm asking Raleigh and Newbury to go back to your boards and really think about the alternative assessment. It's only going to help all 3 communities, you know, to look at it. I'm sure there's something that our representative
Yeah, did you see it?
Right under the bus.
in that,
World peace, too, Marissa.
She does have her CDL too, so that had to hurt.
Yeah, that's Linda.
that's all I'm
we're
just
gonna have
saying
you
is
ourselves.
we work really hard to try and,
Oh, that's not lost on anybody. We know that. We know that.
does anybody have anything else on the budget? The next item is Whittier, that 2 of their members are up for. And what we usually do is send out and advertise that this position's available. If you guys want to, at your board levels, to try and advocate for more people to apply for that position. Anybody that comes to the school committee, we will take a vote on. But over the years, it's only been 1 from each town.
If we're lucky, yeah.
Every single time, that we've only had 1 applicant for each town.
And just to confirm, we have a letter confirming Ron Fitzgerald
Yeah.
is
Is interested in
for Salisbury, and David Irving is interested for
And
Raleigh.
their letters are in this, on this agenda.
That's all.
So we'll also bring it up again in our February meeting.
Yeah.
And,
Ron's done a really good job. He started coming to our select board meetings. We've rotated him in like you come. Has started to rotate in too.
that's great.
Yeah, which was
And
something.
he's alumni of Whittier, he really cares about the schools.
Yeah. And I think that Newbury and Raleigh should have.
I think Raleigh did. You guys had your representative start coming and presenting to.
No, he doesn't present anything.
Oh, okay.
He doesn't present anything. He came with Maureen Lynch once. We got no answers from her whatsoever. So,
I mean, we have every board in the town has to, every meeting, we had somebody that's presenting, and it's usually the chair of a board, our department heads, school committee, and then we added the Whittier committee. So he comes and speaks to us twice a year. So twice a year, just to give us an update. I mean, it's an easy,
that was our goal, but I'll leave it at that, but maybe we'll get some applicants.
Yeah.
So we should say, we haven't set a date yet because we got, these came just before DCC. So we haven't had a school committee yet to discuss these, but usually the process is submitting a letter of interest to Brian and Linda. They can come in via email. It's usually end of February, I believe, that we have as a deadline roughly. There, I mean, again, until we have a discussion, we won't have one set. And then we usually vote at our March business meeting, submit the names back to Whittier, and then they get sworn back in. The term ends at the end of March.
Didn't sign?
March 31st. Amen.
I didn't sign.
So again, it's one from Rowley and one from Salisbury. That's it.
Newbury's next year.
Joanna's next year.
Does anybody have anything else? I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you.
You got it.
And the next meeting is February 6th in Newbury. Have a nice evening.
Caitlin and Erin, can I get you guys to sign my paper?
We have a current location.
No, not ready for selectmen.
We have a current location.
I'm moderating.
I thought you had papers. Who's, oh, that's yours.
No,
Okay.
these are, you have to sign Erin's.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like Caitlin.
Are you both?
No, she thought it was her, it's me.
Well, I can't count.
Nicole usually
had reached out. I literally just.
would it not be in the same room?
I